Thank you very much. If you could please stand there. Thank you. You can. That's was an excellent presentation. Of course,
if it's true, I don't know.
And we sort of understand.
Physics, we have another way of determining if things are true, but we still do an experiment. But I don't know.
And you give us some very interesting insight into why maybe China signed on to the latest round of sanctions. They've been promised 500,000 barrels of oil from the UAE. But, of course, pressure is going to increase on Iran, and it's going to affect China. Yeah. How do you think, talk a little bit more about the China sanctions relationship, and if you think the U.S. can turn to China to put more pressure on Iran to play a more constructive role. What is the role China can play in terms of Iran in the nuclear crisis?
I mean, my impression is that right now a number of things sort of calm down in the relationship immediately with China and the United States, not just this. Also, is that working properly? Also, with the currency issues, there was discussion in Congress just a couple days ago about this, but it didn't take off in complaints about currency and, in the way that you might have thought it would. So things seem to be, I think my guess is, let me back up a little bit. It seems to me the Obama administration has invested more diplomatic capital in this than anything else, since very shortly after it came in power. And in a perhaps quieter way than the Bush administration did these things, who would have imagined before that, oh, you're going to get, I mean, think of all the op-eds. You'll never get the Russians on board. You'll never get the Chinese on board. Forget that. Get the Germans on board. You know? And then, well, what about the various levers that Iran has in the Middle East, projecting power in the Straits of Hormuz, its relation with Syria, things to do with Palestine, and even Hezbollah is having internal difficulties. If you look at these various ways that Iran has to exert leverage against American sanctions or threats of using force, it seems like the Obama administration has been extraordinarily successful in their goal. And my impression from listening to the President Ahmadinejad last night and things in the news, it seems like he wants, I mean, in his own way, and even though there's great opposition from the right and from the left at home to him doing this for various reasons, it seems like he wants to talk. And I wouldn't be surprised that he might want to talk, maybe before things get worse in some way. But the administration seems like we're going to let him stew for a while and get in a better situation. So it would seem that when you look at the Russians, you look at the Chinese, and answer your question, when things are going in this direction with this kind of inertia, that's probably not the time when you're going to see them objecting. In the end, it's quite clear to me that the Chinese nor the Russians really want the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon or nuclear capacity if it came to that kind of thing. Well, I didn't completely answer your question, but I talked a long time.
Well, right. I'll open the floor to other questions. If people could please state their name and their affiliation. And for people in the overflow room, we've got question cards that can be brought to the front.
Or they can come to the door maybe.
Good morning or afternoon. I'm Bob Dreyfus with The Nation magazine.
Yes.
I spent time in the last year in both Iran and China talking about this stuff. One of the things that I learned in both places is that if you compare Iraq and Iran,
yes,
both of which have suffered 30 years worth of war and revolutions and so on, Iraq can rebuild its oil industry, it seems, with Western technology and investment and support. And Iran doesn't have access really to that technology and support. Yeah. So my question is, does China have any ability whatsoever to, let's say, move into either one of those countries significantly with investment, technology, to rebuild what are basically, crippled industries? Or does really Iran have to sort of come around to depend on the West and therefore, make a deal with the West in order to get out from underneath these sanctions?
As of a few years ago, at least this is what the EIA said. It's not in their current update, but I don't think the Iranian National Oil Company, since the revolution, has never developed an oil field independently. Now, they've got all this gas that they really need to develop, both to inject into wells to get oil out, and for many different reasons. So on their own, it seems like they've done what they could. I mean, the Iranian engineers are, just like, I mean, actually, Iraqi engineers are incredibly competent, as far as I know. Iran has in the scientific community, I know they're actually at a very high level, and it's not as far as I understand and what I've seen, it's no different in the oil sector. But they simply don't have the funds, the money. A lot of the money of the oil company year after year up until very recently was going to buy gasoline to bring into the country, to the extent that people were saying they don't even fix leaks because it wasn't worth it. I mean, it didn't make sense economically. It was a very bad situation. Now, Ahmadinejad is moving fairly hard to cut back on subsidies to the population. I don't know if that is sufficient to change and put more money in the hands of the companies so they don't use up all their funds buying gasoline where they can actually develop things. But under the sanctions now, I wonder how much, somebody who's maybe a little more expert in this, I don't know, some things are grandfathered in, some of Chinese, commercial interests, but how much they'll really be able to do. Now, as to the Chinese technical level, it depends on what you're talking about. They're not going to go offshore in deep areas. I know, I'm thinking of I know specific things in Latin America. Like the Brazilians said, thank you, I know you want to come in and partner for us. We're interested in keeping out the foreign majors, but you've got what we need, money. They said, but you don't know how to do anything offshore. Just give us your money, we'll give you a stream of oil and we'll keep out the foreign majors and we'll all be happy. And they made sort of a deal like that. I know with the heavier oil, the Venezuelans insist that they try and make them team up with Total because they trust Total more. So it depends where you're going. These are relatively new oil companies. They have their own oil sector that they've had for a long time, and they're extremely competent, but it takes some time. So they're not on a level, certainly, of, well, I don't want to say BP, but, depends what you do, I'm just kidding. But, or Exxon and so forth. And they do have a learning curve, so they can go in certain places. For example, in Iraq, when you're coming in as a service company to fix fields that are really rich fields that have been devastated, but they've already been developed and fix it up, oops. Often that's something you can do. So you have to look at case by case, what they can do and what they can't do. And are they actually going to put all that money in for some of these development projects in Iran under sanctions, even if they're somehow allowed to? It's,